This is probably a bad time to mention I don't think Gamecube Switch Online is happening, but that's a topic for another video.
Well, this is, kinda awkward. Around the end of the Switch 1's lifespan, Nintendo started giving us remasters of Metroid Prime, Thousand Year Door, and the first couple Pikmin games. So it seemed like their method of giving us GameCube stuff was gonna be through individual re-releases, but here we are, exclusive to the Switch 2, GameCube Nintendo Classics. Yeah, they've decided to rename their retro game apps from Nintendo Switch Online to Nintendo Classics, which fits way better in my dumb baby opinion. I'll be checking out the quality and features offered with this app, as well as doing mini reviews for each of the games that were here at launch. But first, we need to confirm if the most important feature has returned, and I am happy to report, yes, it's here. Right away, I gotta say this game lineup is a little sad. Not the quality of the games, no way. However, N64 launched with 9 games in comparison to GameCube's 3. In the reveal trailer, they showed off more titles are coming, but man, Nintendo really loves doing this drip feed thing. I get it's to build hype and prolong the service and all that, but you gotta wonder how long it'll take for other people's favorites to be added, if at all. To get technical for a minute, the games are displayed at a resolution of 1600 by 900 pixels, and I've seen some people bummed out that they aren't 4K or even full HD, but I think it's a good enough upgrade without clashing too hard with how the games originally looked. Not everything gets upscaled, so it can be pretty jarring when you go from low resolution artwork to models much more detailed. Thankfully, there's a CRT filter, which works really well at hiding those rough edges by making everything look more consistent with each other. Save states are here as expected, though rewind isn't in yet. I hope it gets added sooner or later, as the N64 app didn't get the feature for years and it's not even available on the Switch 1. Controller remapping finally made it, and while it's not nearly as needed for GameCube as it is for N64 games, the feature is still very much appreciated. The controls menu will tell you what each button does in whatever game you're playing, which is real nice. I did get the GameCube Switch 2 controller from Nintendo's website, but before we get to that, in case you were wondering, you can use the GameCube controller adapter for the good old wired experience, though you'll have to use a different controller to suspend the game, as well as get to the home menu. Back to the shiny new one, I gotta say it feels really nice. Almost forgot how good GameCube sticks feel when they're not destroyed from playing Smash Bros. There's quite a lot of stuff on top, including buttons for syncing, home, capture, and game chat, as well as a USB-C charging port. There's also a ZL button, and no matter how tiny they made it, a GameCube controller with a second bumper might be the most repulsive thing I've ever seen. You're dead to me. Additionally, the controller also has a gyroscope. Definitely an odd inclusion. I can't think of too many games that support motion controls that you'd want to play with a GameCube controller. Actually, there is one. Metroid Prime Remastered has an option to use GameCube-style controls with gyro aiming. I swear, this game and controller were destined for each other. Which is what I would say. You can't remap buttons on this controller, and all I have to ask is, but why? To my knowledge, not a single GameCube game supports motion controls, so the implementation of a gyroscope implies they wanted you to use it for other games. However, the control schemes for Switch titles weren't designed with these controllers in mind, so even the GameCube control option in Prime Remastered simply doesn't work. And these unnecessary restrictions Nintendo put on this thing are really my only complaint with it. Unlike the N64 Switch controller, the GameCube one won't read any inputs on PC. I'm not sure if this was intentionally done by Nintendo or not, but regardless, it's a bummer, since I wanted to try out Resident Evil 4 with the controller, and even if I bought the Switch version of the game, again, there's no support for remapping, so I straight up can't do it. The controller itself is very nice. I can only hope support on both Switch 2 and PC improve in the future, and that this isn't a replacement for the wired ones they release for each new Smash Bros. Game, as not only does it keep original GameCube hardware alive, but it's also optimal for being good at competitive play, which I wouldn't know anything about. It was kind of shocking how Nintendo chose F-Zero to be one of the 3 launch titles for the service. The series isn't exactly that popular, outside of that one character people know from You thought I was gonna make another Smash Bros joke, didn't you? I was gonna say the character from Mario Kart 8! Squadala, we are off! The game was developed by Sega as their first major collaboration with Nintendo since leaving the console market, and it resulted in one of the most unapologetically early 2000s games I've ever played. Everything, the futuristic visuals, character designs, and the least serious CGI cutscenes of all time. Graphically, the game has held up extremely well, and even more so thanks to it running at 60 frames per second. The game even supports widescreen and it still looks amazing. My favorite part of it is that it hides all the extra stuff on the sides of the screen, which really needs an option to be turned off. I'll be immersed playing a game and sometimes feel like I'm actually back in time playing it on original hardware. Then I glance at my Nintendo Switch profile icon and go, oh, right. Back to GX, let it be known, the game is hard. Like, really hard. The speed you travel at is lightning fast, and unlike Mario Kart, the price of failure in single player is a lot more severe. If your machine breaks or falls off the track, the race is over. Boosting shares the same meter as your health, meaning if you want to go as fast as possible, you're more than likely going to end up in an all or nothing situation. Traversing around the track and other racers at an insane speed, where the slightest nick on anything will result in your demise. Despite being busy fighting for your life, these courses still manage to leave an impression with unique settings and an amazing soundtrack to complement them. The controls feel incredibly responsive, but I am worried new players aren't going to be aware of everything they have at their disposal. This is why I would have really appreciated the manuals being included with this service. Because GX doesn't have an in-game tutorial, players will have to resort to sources outside of the game, which takes them out of the experience and is overall lame. Story mode is more like mission mode, where the challenge really ramps up. Please, do not assume the story mode is a good place for beginners to start, or else you will die. Instead, I suggest messing around in practice and time trials to learn the controls of the game, then try out Grand Prix, and move on to story mode when you feel ready to spend the next 2 hours seeing this on your screen. Every playable racer has their own profile with their own unique music track. There's a crazy amount of unlockables, and you can even design your own machine to race in. Though I'll leave that job up to the developers, as this creation took me about 15 minutes. There's a ton of love put into this game, and if you're willing to stick with it and overcome its high difficulty, you'll find yourself with one of the greatest titles Nintendo has ever released, which is a little funny considering it was made by the guys they were at war with just a few years earlier. I'm super glad it's been re-released, but it's not without its issues. There's two problems with the controls when not using a GameCube controller. The first is that A is used to accelerate and Y to boost, but on Switch 2 controllers, those two buttons are much farther apart. Thankfully, this can be fixed with button remapping, but a more stubborn issue is the lack of analog triggers. GameCube had a feature where the input would change depending on how far you'd press the triggers, but Nintendo never implemented them since the Wii Classic controller. In the case of GX, your vehicle drifts are affected by this, so the Switch 2 controllers have to make do, so the triggers always register as a full press, which limits the range at which you can turn. The L button is unused by default, so perhaps Nintendo could update the control so that when you press it alongside the triggers, it acts as if it would be a halfway press instead. Then there's a problem that applies to all controllers, period. On Switch 2, the game thinks the control stick is being pushed all the way to the side, when in reality it still has a solid amount left to go, making the controls more sensitive than they actually should be. I don't think it makes the game unplayable, but it can definitely be annoying, and I hope Nintendo fixes this. With how borderline unfair the later difficulties become, you need all the control over your machine you can get. The online play connection was also fine. My buddy and I live quite far away from each other, so I'm surprised it was as decent as it was, but it still wasn't preferable for a game as demanding as F-Zero, though I suppose your experience may vary. I'm a little sad this didn't get a proper remaster with revamped online multiplayer, but other than that, F-Zero GX is pretty much a perfect game in my eyes, even if some of the story missions had me on the brink of insanity.
You guys have officially made me lose my marbles!
Soul Calibur II is a 3D fighter similar to Tekken, but sets itself apart by character movesets primarily based around weapons, and also taking place in a more medieval setting. As per usual fighting game rules, you defeat your opponent by taking their health to 0, but can also instantly win by having them fall off the stage, which can result in some pretty embarrassing ways to lose.
No!
Once again, the game visually looks great, runs at 60 frames per second, and supports widescreen. But who cares about that? You're here because this game has Link in it. He has his spin attack, bow, bombs, even the pogo sword from Zelda 2. It's one of the most swag crossovers Nintendo has ever done, and he fits perfectly into the roster and universe of Soul Calibur. When the Zelda theme started playing near the end of his arcade mode, I shed a few tears. Not because of the music, but because I was getting owned. Even besides Link, the rest of the roster is very memorable. It helps they have some pretty hilarious voice lines and victory screens.
You win!
Arcade mode is your standard fight gauntlet of enemies until you make it to the boss game mode, and you have unlimited retries, making it quite beginner friendly. Not to mention each fighter gets their own ending cutscene and profile you can view after completion. Weapon Master is where the real single player content is to be found, and unlike GX's story mode, I do recommend new players begin here, since it's where the proper tutorial is located. This mode is told in a way kinda like a role-playing game. Whichever character you select is spoken of as if they're the main character, with little intermissions between stages that consist of text, leaving a good amount of the story to your imagination, which I really like. The rest of the roster are recontextualized as different characters in the story, sometimes having different names or being portrayed as generic bandits or thieves. You'll traverse a world map to different missions that each have unique win conditions and obstacles, and making progress will unlock you new characters, stages, and even weapons. Arcade mode and Weapon Master are pleasantly substantial single-player offerings, but of course, the true joy of fighting games is going up against your friends. Playing fighting games where both players have no idea what is happening or what to expect is genuinely some of the most entertaining video game you can ever experience.
Because I definitely don't
As for the emulation quality, I didn't notice any errors. There was a cutscene I thought had some visual hitches, though I've checked the same scene from the original and it happens there as well. This time, the online play was pretty solid for my experience. It probably could be better in the eyes of fighting game experts, but from a casual perspective, it worked well enough. I won't lie, I was expecting to only try out Calibur II for just a while, but the more I played, I became quite invested in it. Even if you don't consider yourself that amazing at fighting games, I still recommend giving it a try, for its beginner friendliness and single-player shenanigans. Wind Waker wasn't the most popular game when it released back in 2002. Because the 2000s were all about trying to be as gritty and edgy as possible, next to the competition, Gamecube was seen as the dumb, stupid baby console for dumb, stupid babies. Fans wanted a new Zelda game to help their console out, and it's not hard to see why after how dark Ocarina of Time and especially Majora's Mask could get. So while Sony had Metal Gear and Microsoft had Halo, Nintendo fans got a Zelda game that looked like it was for dumb, stupid babies. A few years later, Twilight Princess satisfied the request for a more mature Zelda experience, and since then, fans have realized maybe Wind Waker isn't for dumb, stupid babies. It just came at the absolute worst time conceivable. As someone playing the game for the first time, I have to say, the visuals of Wind Waker have aged gracefully. I think it's the best overall looking title on the system alongside Thousand Year Door. The art style gives it a lot of charm, and the game in general is practically drowning in personality, to the point I could see any part of the entire adventure being someone's favorite. Every character, no matter what role they serve in the story, have super memorable designs. This is undeniably the most expressive Link in the series. Also, the guy I lost to in Soul Calibur looks like this! But remember kids, graphics don't mean anything if the gameplay isn't swag. Zelda combat has never been the most in-depth, rather its presentation is what makes it feel a lot more engaging. Enemies can drop their weapons, which Link can pick up to use against them. It's not the most mind-blowing mechanic, yes, but it doesn't make it any less satisfying. With each strike that you land plays a musical hit, each more intense depending on the strength of the attack, which rewards the player with very prominent audio feedback. The soundtrack in general is very strong, and it reminds me of the good old days where Nintendo titles would consistently have songs that immediately get stuck in your head, which is something I think they've struggled a little with lately. I immediately found myself really enjoying the themes for areas, battles, and the dungeons. Speaking of dungeons, yep, it's about that time. Walking into a traditional Zelda dungeon for the first time is such a unique feeling. Taking in the ambient music and atmosphere, knowing you're going to be traversing this hostile environment until you can overcome the challenges it has waiting for you. At the same time, it's also exciting to see what new item you'll discover, and utilizing it to solve puzzles with your thinking skills. There are some moments where the solution can be a little cryptic, but making it through most, if not all of the dungeon without a guide, is an immensely rewarding feeling. Though it is worth questioning what Nintendo plans to do with Wind Waker HD now, I've always been interested in playing the original first, and really enjoyed my time with it. In fact, I was looking forward to playing it to completion, except my playthrough was stopped short due to my luck blessing me with a soft lock right after I took down a boss, and me being the genius that I am forgot to save at any point during the dungeon, meaning when I reset my game, I had to restart it entirely. I'll come back to it for sure, but only after I cleanse the raw gamer rage out of my body first. Listen, I still might be disappointed the GameCube app launched with only 3 games, but wow, those 3 that Nintendo did pick were really solid choices. You've got a racing game that up to 4 people can play both locally and online, a fighting game that you can play 1v1 against your buddies, also with a ton of stuff to delve into if you're by yourself, and the major single-player adventure that, while not the exact version most were asking for, is still a title that people wanted on Switch for a long time. The expansion pack for Switch Online was announced in October 2021, and I, for one, didn't bother upgrading. I'll buy most of Nintendo's stuff if it seems worth it to me, but the expansion pack at the time didn't. I also personally don't care for subscription services. I'd much rather have my classic games in a more preservable format, one that doesn't require an internet connection to open and can remove titles at any time. So if you can already play these games elsewhere, maybe the service still isn't of interest to you. And yet, I'll give compliments where compliments are due. 4 years later, with the inclusion of GameCube, GBA, and almost the entirety of the N64's notable games, I'd argue the expansion pack is worth the money. And hey, not to mention the convenience of the service is also really nice. I wanted to play the classic Mario Party titles with my pals, and Switch simply provided the best way to set that up. So those are my thoughts on GameCube on Switch 2, and I guess the expansion pack as a whole. This service had quite the rough start, and while it still isn't perfect, I'm glad to see it's in a much better spot. With all that being said, there's only one thing left to say. What? You think I'm gonna beg for you to subscribe or something? I'll pass. Instead, my final words will be telling you not to be like me, and end up wasting an hour of your life because you were too lazy to save.